Okay, so for my topic, reflections, it's, I've gathered a, group of thoughts, plethora of thoughts on this very difficult area or sets of areas. I'd say that an increased deployment of ubiquitous computing and surveillance systems continues to transform the world, blurring the boundaries between the human and the machine. Ubicom systems can certainly lead to quantitative augmentation and reaching complexity. But the question, or one of the key questions, is then how much does this translate into qualitative improvements for human life? At stake is the issue of human agency and how these technologies influence our ability to act in the world. In my presentation, I will examine relationships between complexity, human culture in the context of ubiquitous computing and surveillance systems. I contend, at the heart of it, that the understanding of the world available through human observation is of a different order and type from the sensor-mediated form of observation of computers. And just as a brief prelude to this is the idea that, okay, so we are coming in the past 30, 35 years from working in a paradigm where we have the interaction of many to one, that is with mainframe computing, and then we move from that to a one-to-one interaction with personal computing, and then what is Ubicom or ubiquitous computing in a very simplified manner. We are talking about a situation where now the human being is completely surrounded or will eventually be completely surrounded, and this is falling, by computing devices. And of course, I can show many different examples of how this happens, and this is just one. And here what we have is a map from Telegraphy. Telegraphy is a company that creates maps for underwater cables, and according to their website, we have that at the moment we have 299 active underwater cables that are part of the whole network that is creating the communications infrastructure that supports some of our ubiquitous computing activities. Okay, so this is like a situation of the human being being totally submerged immersed in computational related activities. This is I found this very inspiring illustration in the blog of Satya Nadella, who happens to be CEO of Microsoft, and how he describes the situation, as he says, nearly all interactions and experiences between humans and computers, and between computers now get digitized. The opportunity we have in this new world is to find a way of catalyzing this data exhaust from ubiquitous computing and converting it into fuel for ambient intelligence. This fuel will power improved experiences, understanding, and interactions. When these devices around us gain the capacity to listen to us, respond to us, understand us, and act on our behalf, we enter into an entirely new era, the era of ambient intelligence. As I mentioned in my introduction, these developments are transforming the very core of human culture, since our doing in the world is connected to our thinking and feeling, and this in turn guides our doing or agency and our ability to act in the world. What cannot be ignored is how these technologies act as mediators between human beings and this so-called complexity in the world. And this is an image that I got when you type complexity in Google search and you select images, you get something like this. And for me, it's emblematic because, we chose it to be the cover of our upcoming book about complexity and culture. Yeah. And what is complexity? What do we mean by complexity? This is a very difficult term to approach. But I will, propose that I will go along with what system scientist Jean-Louis Lemoine, what he has noted. He has noted that a complex system is by definition built by the observer who is interested in it. Underscore, what this means is that it is not something inherent in the phenomenon being studied, but rather it's an epistemological tool that moved into the foreground in the 20th century through the study of living systems as open, complex entities. Sociologist Niklas Luhmann, who viewed the world as the ultimate complexity, developed a theory to describe complexity in systems. Luhmann's theory can be used to examine systems in science, politics, and, lo and behold, even art. In the case of the latter, my interests are grounded in the domain's art's ability to build bridges to other knowledge fields, and also on the potential agency of the artist for generating new systems. In Luhmann's theory, systems theory applied to art, he would say that a system is defined, or he says a system is defined by a boundary between itself and its environment, dividing it from an infinitely complex or, colloquially, chaotic exterior. So the interior of the system can be seen as a zone of reduced complexity. And communications within the system operates by selecting only a limited amount of all the information available outside. And here's, would be an example of an art system according to Luhmann. This is a work of art by the American artist James Turrell, 1992. It's at the Museum of Jerusalem. And as you can see, to access the work, you simply walk into this little room. And can I move with this? Yes, you can move this. And then you can, sit in this square and behold the sky above. According to Luhmann, a system comes into being through observation that detects and marks or indicates a distinction on one side, but not the other. So here we can see in this little graphic the marked state on marked state. So presumably that which is gathered in the frame, in this case the sky, at a particular moment in time is the work of art itself. Observation, in Luhmann's view, is intentional behavior. In art systems, this intentionality presupposes an opportunity for the observers, to participate in the communication. However, observation yields more than difference, since it reproduces itself through time with the help of indications that are themselves bound by distinctions. And in my opinion, what we have here is history, so then of course it would be possible then to track that history. It is possible to track that history. Moving forward, another example, and it's cutting a little bit, in this case of another artwork. In this case, the artwork is by the famous group ensemble. It's a British ensemble, Blast Theory. It's called Dial, Ulrich, and Emond Compliant. And it was premiered at the Venice Biennial 2009. And I have selected to show it because of the role of observation in the work itself. Following Luhmann's thought about observation, if observation is intentional behavior, and in art system, this intentionality then presupposes an opportunity for the observers of the artwork to participate in the communication. So the idea is that the audience should be involved, is involved always and active. These opportunities manifest already in the form or way in which the individual work of art presents itself. A theater play, for example, affords different communication parameters from a sculpture or an interactive installation. Also, the author of the work is in a position to control, direct, and even mislead if he or she so desires the observations generated by his or her work. And this is where I would like to ask Minna to help me with the video, because I would like to show you a little, very short section of this. This is what you would call work of locative art that makes use of mobile telephony to stage a performance in which the audience selects a role. You can be either Ulrika, the famous German terrorist, or you could be Eamon, a famous Irish terrorist. And the idea with the work is that situations from the life of these two characters are then transposed to the setting in Venice. And the spectator, assuming this role, transverses the city and then engages in activities where he or she experiences surveillance and also the questioning of his or her political beliefs. So you could, yeah. As a creator of art, the artist's labor is twofold, according to Luhmann. He or she operates both as an observer of the work as it's being produced, and as observer who in anticipation beholds how the work will be perceived. Observation not only guides the initial conceptualization, but also repeats itself in the production of the work. This occurs primarily through the body of the artist, which he or she uses as an observation device and to bring complexity into the work of art. This is realized admirably in this location-based work in which both artist and audience participate in the creating of the performance. And if you can, imagine what happens is that whoever participates is literally steps into the shoes or tries to step into the shoes of being one of these people. At the same time, it is obvious that this is an invention, that is not true, and that is part of the farcical and very strange situation. So at the end of the piece also there is a moment when you are then prompted to go into this office type space, and there you are questioned about your political beliefs. You are not videotaped, but then the person that was before you will observe as you are responding. So what we have here in this case is a very interesting example of a combination of what Luhmann calls the first order observation, that is direct and realized as a perception from where the location is, where the observer is situated, to the second order observation that is based on the observations of others. And then, of course, from my perspective, what this raises is the question is whether this is possible, that that systems that are not living systems like we are can actually carry on this kind of task. Since second-order observation is based on the first-order observations of others and also recognizes a distinction between living entities and objects. Ooh, what a change from that setting to this image here. from one of the windows of the Church of the Three Crosses in Imatra that was realized by the Finnish architect Alvar Aalto. Observation, or drawing our attentiveness to the world around us in a systematic manner, I propose, is as basic an operation and need to humans as breathing, drinking water, or even thinking. To this extent, we endlessly conjecture how our notion of reality is guaranteed by our observations. Though our observations are limited by the extent of our sensory perception, this perception is also influenced by our human way of life in culture. Looking at this example, one would argue that the church has about, I think it's 103 windows that were like designed into it. It's fantastic in all kinds of interesting shapes. And it would be, I would argue that those windows are there for more than simply receiving light or looking outside, but that there's an aesthetic as well as a social and individual aspect, and that this is a very basic component of the human order. And it has to do, it's very closely related to the notion of human agency. So then we come back to computing devices. Here are some examples of ancient, I would propose these are ancient ubiquitous technologies. If you would, consider that the word computing, it comes from the Latin computo, to compute or to count. At the right here, actually would be my left, we have Hiroshi Ishii, and he is one of the authors of a very seminal paper on tangible bits, and he himself has acknowledged the deep contribution of heritage artifacts like the abacus to their tangible interfaces paradigm. In this seminal 1997 paper, Ishii and Ulmer observed the complexity of these artifacts when they stated how our ancestors developed a variety of specialized artifacts to measure the passage of time, to predict the movement of the planets, draw the geometric shapes, and to compute. Interaction with these devices gathered within different orders of understanding that opens up access to experiences of space and time, as well as to an understanding of how space and time should be experienced. In this manner, observation comes together with agency, our ability to act, which also finds expression in culture. Observation and surveillance are not the same thing, although they are related. Ubiquitous systems that employ surveillance, such as those using location GPS, for example, efficiently handle as first-order observations multiple signals received from different satellite stations. These systems deploy inside-out sensors and methods, such as time-of-flight differences and lateration, to obtain first- and second-order observations. These methods are used then to determine the distance between satellites, thus allowing for calculation of mobile devices' positions. From a Luhmannian perspective, I wonder, can the operations comparing time of signal emission and reception be regarded as instances of a system self-observation? Well, I would say from reviewing Luhmann's work that he would have said no, since the basic distinction that precludes artificial systems from carrying self-observation still holds. Also, the lack of the mechanisms for recognizing individual receivers indicates an absence of hetero-observation. And what I have found too is that this is also regarded as an instance of the system's blind spot. So, for sure, observation and surveillance are not the same thing. Then about surveillance. Surveillance is considered to be a central and problematic dimension of modernity, or a modern society, since it is a key provider of data fuel that powers ubiquitous computing applications. Endemic to social media, contemporary surveillance is partly about gathering and processing of personal data for the purpose of influence and managing the behavior of others whose information is collected. In this manner, it is clearly implicated in the co-opting of human agency. Here, I draw inspiration from an example by artist Hassan Elahi. This is one of his works. He's an interdisciplinary media artist with an emphasis on technology and media and their social implication. And in his work, he demonstrates the paradox that emerges when extreme modes of observation, such as surveillance, are taken too far. And this is based on his own personal life and experience, and a situation of mistaken identity and false accusation. In the year 2002, Hassan became the target of the FBI scrutiny as a potential terrorist. And as he started being watched and he couldn't move because he was told that, okay, so you cannot leave the country, so, and he knew that they were observing him, he started to watch himself. He figured that he would be able to do it better than them. Then he started to provide the information for them, and he actually came up with, a very interesting set of applications. They're installed in his website, through which he compiled databases of everything that he was doing day after day after day. And these are the results of this work, which he compiled in databases such as, okay, all the airports he has been in, hotel beds he has slept on, food on the airplanes that he has, taken. These applications also contain screenshots of financial data, communication records, transportation logs, and the idea with this, it didn't start as an art project, but it became an art project. It was because he had to verify that he was at the locations that he said he was on the dates and times that he specified. The work that I'm showing now, this work, when it's shown in exhibition, is shown as collage photography, where each image contains, or frame, contains hundreds of the images featuring these observations. As he puts it, in relation to this idea of surveillance, in an era in which everything is archived and tracked, he reasons, the best way to maintain my privacy might be to simply give it up. Okay, notions such as, it is actually this fluidity of data that also prompted Zygmunt Bauman to label ours as the liquid modernity society, or the society of the liquid modernity, where notions such as data at rest and data on the fly are used to open legal loopholes and facilitate the siphoning of private information by military agencies as it travels from one location to another. So as new systems of surveillance emerged that operate at the intersection of what is labeled as context awareness and automated capture and access. As first-order observations, these signals are then aggregated into data structures that are automatically passed to an application interface layer for further processing. And as instruments of aggregation, profiles are used to establish new relations among the data, and what results is a quote-unquote data double of a person that it's made up, it's your double made up with personal data only in the sense that at some point it originated with your body. This process of separating our data from our body, Bauman refers to this as a segmentation and a diaphorization of human agency, that in the name of efficiency enables a disabling of moral resistance and critical thinking. Using Hannah Arendt's term, what happens is that there's a floating of responsibility to block direct attribution, and disable possible moral evaluation. Ethical questions are suspended in lieu of purported necessities such as the economy, the need to do business. It is actually the reverse of agency what is in effect if we consider that agency is something that is anchored to our physical bodies. And then what we have is a situation where also, in addition to what is happening with this siphoning of data, you have that we ourselves are the ones, as you know, in the case of Hassan, that is an extreme case, but we ourselves also agree to become part of these visibility traps in network spaces and social media applications, where we become both the subject and object of observation, and it is the content of our lives and our experience that are the sellable commodities that we generate. So then if we look back at the beginning of the century, where we had like a lot of critical studies that were done on the work of the panopticon as the technology that was used to impose regimes of order where subjects themselves would internalize the policing and control themselves, then what is happening is that, you know, we ourselves are then becoming the panopticons of ourselves. Thank you, I'll be done in just a moment. And one last slide about that is, and what, you know, actually shows that this is working, a recent report that was, you know, came out last year, it's called Global Chilling. And it's a report published by PEN America that describes how levels of self-censorship reported by writers living in democratic countries are approaching the levels reported by writers living in authoritarian or semi-democratic countries. So not necessarily we have more freedom. And then, the last slide, I have tried, in my presentation, I have tried to gather some thoughts about this subject of ubiquitous computing, observation, surveillance, and try to show how through the use of infrastructures like communication networks, we are being clustered together into a separate artificial order, and where there's an implicit mandate to observe and follow. So this intentionality is inherent in the systems that track us because they have been created to do so. The search for finer degrees of precision in observation is but a search for control of the human and the environment. And among the questions that we should continue asking is, for what purpose and who really benefits? Thank you.